Okay, so hey everybody, welcome back to week 9. Today we're going to be looking at tokenomics, and so this is kind of right towards the end of the course. Obviously, next week is the last week, um, but tokenomics is essentially taking everything that we've understood from how a blockchain works, the immutability, the critical elements of it, the decentralized nature of it, and understanding why all these tokens, how come all these projects have tokens. Bitcoin obviously was kind of almost a result of the hashing on the blockchain. It was kind of like this coin that was rewarded to people for completing these these programmatic algorithms, and that's called mining. And then you get a proof of stake with Ethereum, where if you lock up these coins, then you get awarded coins based on how much the coin is being used to pay for gas on the network. And that makes sense because Ethereum is used, Bitcoin is used. But then you also have lots of tokens and tokenomics that are starting to be used in new and interesting ways with projects that perhaps aren't being used or don't have that backing yet. And the question is, will that actually work? And we'll look at that today. So kind of the introduction looking at, we're essentially looking at to what extent do projects that add tokens, to what extent does a token help a project, or what ways can a token be used in a project? Because in order to be interacting with the Web3 ecosystem, you don't actually need to have a token. You can still use somebody else's token or just, directly use their chain. So why would you introduce your own token, and what's the difference between, you know, your token and somebody else's token? So we're going to look at that. And so looking a little bit at how the kind of overarching question is like, how do tokenomics influence security in a Web3 economy? How do they make it better? How do they make it worse? Could they make it better or worse? Sorry. And what's the function? And so we have essentially 3 types of tokens. In this video, in a second, we'll go into this. But essentially, you have utility tokens. They are used in this ecosystem to pay for things within the ecosystem, like Ethereum. Security tokens, which are specifically securities. Most people haven't heard of these because they are usually issued by a bank to represent bonds or something like that. But there are some security tokens out there that exist. It's just they can't be traded on major exchanges. They have to be traded only on the securities exchanges, which haven't really taken off. So not many people know about security tokens, but they do exist. And yeah, and also a lot of tokens that exist currently that aren't labeled security tokens are often questioned about whether they are actually securities. And then we have governance tokens, and governance tokens are an interesting, like, newer development. And we'll go into like the DAO, which is an example of a governance token, way back in Inception at the end of this. But essentially, governance tokens count as a vote. Essentially, you can vote on things that happen in the protocol, and as a result, you have an inherent interest in the protocol's development, is the hope. And then from a security perspective side, because the token isn't just representative of future money to be made, which is likely to be a security, the idea behind a governance token is that it represents an inherent role in the economy. So that the idea is that that token is supposed to be used for governing, is supposed to be used for voting, not for speculation. But if it is used for speculation, that's not the protocol's business. I guess is kind of the workaround, the way people see it. But governance tokens largely encompass most tokens out there because it's very easy to say, oh, your utility token also has governance ability, which therefore makes it not a security token. So these kind of tokens will be referenced in the videos, but essentially, the more I guess the more useful or ones that have more provable value, like Bitcoin or Ethereum, are usually utility tokens, and then governance tokens are speculation on what the governance of that protocol might be worth in the future. So yeah, so different tokens are used for different things. And obviously, if you think about a utility token being used for gas to pay for transactions, that's very different than voting. And that's going to have different behaviors in your in your blockchain, and different levels of security, which we'll go into in a second. But first, the video explaining kind of what's also the difference between a coin and a token before we start talking about tokenomics. So here we go.
Coins versus tokens. What's the difference? Are they even different? On the surface, they may seem similar, especially since the terms are commonly used interchangeably, but that's not the case due to the fundamental differences that distinguish them. First off, while all coins may be considered tokens, not all tokens are considered coins. That said, coins have their own blockchains, whereas tokens are built on an existing blockchain. Think of any blockchain, say Ethereum. Its native asset is Ether, right? Or Algorand on the Algorand blockchain, ADA on Cardano. These are all coins. On the other hand, tokens would exist on pre-existing blockchains. Let's take Ethereum and Uniswap as examples. Uniswap's native digital asset is known as Uni. Since Uni is built on a pre-existing blockchain, Ethereum, it qualifies as a token. From this, it's clear that creating a coin is more difficult than creating a token. You may find a blockchain having only one coin, but hundreds or thousands of tokens built on top of it. The difference does not lie in their fundamentals alone, but use cases too. Some coins, such as Bitcoin, are mainly perceived as a store of value by offering an alternative to traditional banking. Other coins focus on digital transactions. These coins are typically designed to be faster and cheaper. Some coins are designed to solve specific problems, like XRP by Ripple, which is used to address cross-border payment problems. They aim to make processing real-time international transactions easier by leveraging the power of the blockchain. Tokens, on the other hand, are popular in decentralized apps. They represent something specific in these dApps. This could be economic value, a stake, or even voting rights, thereby facilitating and encouraging interactions with the protocols. They are typically tied to many functions within their native ecosystem. For instance, Sushi. SushiSwap's native token is used for staking, governance, and even to reward users who deposit assets into liquidity pools. Another cool thing about tokens lies in their power of representing assets through a process known as tokenization. Asset tokenization is not limited to just digital assets. It has also been used to represent physical assets, such as real estate on the blockchain. As you can see, tokens use cases are much more flexible, and their possibilities may be endless.
Okay, so now that we kind of understand what tokens are, how can you actually integrate them into a business model? Why would you want to do that? And so essentially, one of the things that has kind of arisen from bringing tokens in, so Bitcoin was a token, is that you can actually use these tokens as a incentive mechanism to a due degree, like airline miles that give rewards to behavior within a system. And that leads to certain behavior of participants that generate value. That might be the point of the whole business. And so tokenomics can actually create whole new businesses and unlock untapped value. And so an example of that is MakerDAO. MakerDAO is a DAO, decentralized organization. Their Maker token allows you to vote in the DAO, and it gets rewarded. You get rewarded interest from the ecosystem succeeding, or fees being paid in it from its token DAI. So there's a governance token, Maker, and then there's a utility token, DAI, which is like a stablecoin, US stablecoin. And so this allows for essentially, well, I'll let the video kind of explain it, but it allows for locked value to become unlocked to allow people to do things. And this is kind of one of the examples of how blockchain allows for kind of increased, one would say like maybe this is not like sustainability in its like true form of like, are we making it like things, more environmentally friendly or whatever, but from a sustainable perspective of how do you unlock value for people who need value unlocked so that they can care about other things, you must be to be able to be sustainable, you have to be economically sound. And so to be able to bring out value out of the economic system is a sustainable aspect of it. And so this kind of shows you how that works, how Maker unlocks value by using its smart contract protocol to allow for essentially decentralized borrowing and lending. So here's that video.
MakerDAO is exactly what it sounds like. It's a DAO, or a decentralized autonomous organization, and its purpose is to make DAI. DAI is a digital dollar backed by locked up crypto assets like ETH, BAT, WBTC, KNC, and more. And what Maker figured out years ahead of the explosive rise of DeFi is that a stablecoin could be established by incentivizing locking up more value in what was once called a CDP, or a collateralized debt position. Now today, CDPs are called vaults, but if you think about it, a stablecoin is normally backed by dollars, but in crypto, we have these hugely volatile assets. So how do you do it? Well, here's how it works. Say I own ETH and I believe the value of ETH will continue to rise over time. Now, I don't sell ETH because I believe it's a store of value, like BTC or gold. But if I can borrow against the value of ETH in DAI, then I can have the best of both worlds. I can remain exposed to the upside of ETH long term, while spending less of that value in the short term with DAI. While I've minted or borrowed that DAI, I pay an interest rate just like you would borrowing from a bank. But it's all automated by the code in Maker. In MakerDAO, you can deposit and lock up your ETH, as well as other popular liquid crypto assets, and in exchange, you can borrow up to 66% of every dollar you deposit. And this means if you deposit $100 worth of ETH, you can borrow up to 66 DAI, but the code ensures I keep my word of maintaining that loan, or else I will be liquidated by Maker. If I don't hold up my end of the bargain, my ETH is then auctioned to others in the Maker community willing to buy it, so that Maker can remain solvent and pay back my owed debt. And the key takeaway here is MakerDAO remains one of the most successful DeFi projects built on Ethereum, with just under $200 billion in TVL, while nearly 900 million DAI have been minted to date. Unlike your fiat, DAI is digitally scarce and it's traceable on the Ethereum blockchain. But because MakerDAO uses game theory to incentivize borrowers to lock up their valued collateral in exchange for an over-collateralized digital dollar, DAI has effectively become one of the most trusted, trustless digital forms of money. Despite the volatile markets over the last few years, including a 95% drawdown in the price of ETH from all-time highs, DAI's pegged to the US dollar held. And that's a testament to some of the best incentive design in the DeFi game.
Okay, so kind of understanding what MakerDAO does is quite interesting to think about. Now a case study of this idea of the token being a governance token and whether that's a sustainable reality for the business. Because MakerDAO is really interesting because it went through essentially a crisis, because it was set up essentially that the Maker token allows people who hold it to vote on what the protocol does. And if you think about it from a business perspective, once in a while, the C-suite or the partners or the shareholders or whatever are going to have to make a tough decision where they have to basically make less profits for amount of time in order to invest in the business. But in a decentralized protocol where you don't really have a collection of central individuals making decisions, everyone's kind of just trusting each other generally, it's hard to come to that consensus. It's hard for everyone generally to say, okay, yeah, let's take less profits each year because it's hurting our protocol to build the next level of it, because we believe in it. What was happening is essentially they'd keep voting no, and they would just keep the Maker protocol started to fail, or it's not started to fail, but started to essentially become less relevant because it couldn't take the next step up in its development, because the way the governance was set up, it was essentially hampering it from being executed according to what was best for the company rather than what was best for the shareholders, if you will. And so it was quite interesting to think about how, or to look at that happen. And eventually, I'll let the video kind of show what happened, but eventually they overcame that, and they've now changed the rules in order to essentially try to A, allow the governance to work as planned, and B, for the governance to work in a more sustainable way for the business, not just for the holders of the token. And one kind of key thing to recognize here is one of the problems with this was that it's all well and good to give governance tokens an ability to be in governance, but what if nobody votes? Or what if only minority shareholders are voting because all the tokens are just being traded on exchanges, not staked or whatever it is? Then you have a problem with quorum. You have it's quite interesting to see how tokenomics can quickly become kind of like the business governance of an organization. And so understanding what the token does, how much of a role it has in the organization and how much it may not, like do token holders get to say on C-suite decisions? Probably not. But all of that needs to be thought out when you're doing it. So here's an example of the MakerDAO and DAI case study, looking at how they kind of moved past this initially what was a great idea, but then they grew out of and needed to move forward as an organization, as a decentralized organization. And what's interesting is, not to spoil it, but it took centralization to move past the problem. So it wasn't necessarily solved. It was more the co-founder coming in and pushing it over the edge. So here's that video.
MakerDAO, DeFi's largest protocol by total value locked, is about to undergo changes that will affect everything from how it's governed to the price of DAI, the stablecoin it issues. Maker token holders just voted to pass a plan laid out by Rune Christensen, the project's founder, called the Endgame Plan. The vote matters for a few reasons. One, it may change how Maker, DeFi's largest protocol, works. It may affect DAI, the fourth largest stablecoin by supply, and it also highlights the complexities of decentralized governance. Quick reminder, MakerDAO works sort of like a decentralized central bank, which issues DAI, the stablecoin, against cryptocurrencies used as collateral. We'll get into the huge changes that this endgame plan proposes, but first, let's look at why this vote was so controversial. The vote has come under fire because only 15% of Maker, that's Maker's governance token, was mobilized to vote. Not only that, but 3/4 of the vote was mobilized by Christensen, who proposed the changes in the first place. Sebastian Derivo, an asset liability manager at MakerDAO, said that while 122 people voted, really only one person matters, and that's Rune Christensen, because he controls 74% of the vote if you count his votes plus his delegates' votes. So now let's get into the proposal itself. Maker is trying to achieve a lot. It's trying to balance a decentralized governance model, it's trying to maximize its own profitability, and it's trying to minimize regulatory risk. The first major change proposed is that now MakerDAO would have so-called meta-DAOs, which would function as independent business units. So a quick brush up on MakerDAO history. Maker was conceived in 2015 with DAI launching in 2017. It started as a Switzerland-based foundation which oversaw the development of the Maker protocol. The foundation was dissolved last year to give way to so-called core units, which are independent business units that control things from onboarding collateral to growth. Christensen's endgame plan proposes to take decentralization even further, replacing this overarching DAO and its core units with separate individual DAOs called meta-DAOs. Each meta-DAO has its own voting committee and its own token. So the goal of this new structure would be to reduce voter apathy, reduce the complexity of the governance process, and also separate risky activities such as onboarding real-world assets onto the protocol. The second major change is that Maker would now have a protocol-owned vault tasked with accumulating staked ETH. The goal of having more staked ETH would be to have this asset be the main source of collateral for DAI and reduce the reliance on centralized stablecoins such as USDC. The third major part of Rune Christensen's endgame plan includes reducing the amount of real-world assets held in the MakerDAO protocol to 25%. The thinking is the more MakerDAO relies on centralized assets and real-world assets, the more that regulators and authorities can come after it. This would have huge implications because it would mean that DAI would have to be allowed to float freely against the dollar instead of trying to maintain its one-to-one peg. Members of the DeFi and Web3 community argued that a loss in its peg would undermine confidence in DAI, and that trade-off would be too big to take to ensure censorship resistance. So what's next? Now, Maker holders are expected to vote between three strategies: Pigeon Stance, Eagle Stance, and Phoenix Stance. So Pigeon Stance assumes low regulatory risk. It would mean that real-world assets remain uncapped, and DAI stability and peg to the dollar is maintained for at least 2.5 more years. Eagle Stance would mean that DAI is free-floating after these 2.5 years, and it would potentially add a negative target rate to ensure some degree of stability. Phoenix Stance is the most aggressive and would prohibit any exposure to real-world assets to ensure maximal protection against censorship. We're witnessing changes that may lead to a historical impact on the MakerDAO protocol, which, given its size and influence, means that it would be a huge change to DeFi itself. At the core of this debate lies how decentralized should DeFi really be? Should Maker really forgo all exposure to real-world assets and centralized assets in order to make sure that there is no way it can be censored or regulated away? Or should there be some trade-offs to ensure some specific goals like profitability or DAI stability? And is there a way that it can do both? In any case, regardless of where in the decentralization spectrum you lie, I think we can all agree that it would be a lot preferable if more members of the MakerDAO community were participating in these huge changes.
Okay, so we can kind of seen how tokenomics can be used by a protocol to in one case, ideally create like a DAO that can grow and change over time. But one of the problems that we saw is the centralized need, or the need at some point to have a centralized player come in and say, okay, now we're going to do this. And it might hurt us in the short term, but for the protocol to live, we need to do it. Maybe we eventually get to a point where governance works without big players coming together to decide things, and actually everybody votes for it. But that is game theory yet to be tested. And so what I wanted to look at now is the most famous DAO, the first DAO to ever be created, and kind of the story of it, what happened, and kind of what we learned. And it kind of is an example of us learning in crypto and blockchain over time, which has led us to where we are. And so sometimes it's interesting to think about, sometimes like the criticisms of yesteryear are no longer necessarily true of now, because we've learned from what's happened. And so essentially what happened in the DAO was a decision that needed to be made because a dApp, a protocol that built itself on Ethereum when it was very young, was corrupted. And it held so much Ethereum that even though Ethereum didn't have anything go wrong, it was an existential threat to Ethereum as a chain. And so Ethereum had to come up against blockchain's key principle, immutability, whether it would fork, whether, say, okay, the blocks until this point in this hack didn't count. We're going to restart the chain from here on and keep going and cut this person out. Or do we say, well, code is law, this person gamed the system, but that's a big lesson for us all to learn. And it's important for us to learn the lesson, because if we don't, then we will take seemingly similar risks in the future. And then the argument back and forth of whether the risks disclosed, do people understand them, et cetera, and so forth. But whatever in the end, what happened was Ethereum did fork. This went back in time. And so now if you look up on the internet, there's Ethereum Classic and Ethereum, the current Ethereum. And so technically, Ethereum, the current Ethereum is Ethereum 2.0. It's actually not the original Ethereum because it is a fork of the original code to make up for a mistake. And so it's a centralized decision. And so it's kind of interesting to think about from a perspective of business. Is it always going to, is it currently, or is it ever going to be sustainable to have all of your business decided without a centralized authority at some place? Is it wise to do that? In what circumstances is it wise to do that? Is it compartmentalizable, or do you have to? And so those kind of decisions are really how you build a sustainable business, understanding specifically what decentralization is used for and useful for, while also understanding the risks of essentially, like democratizing decisions for whichever sector of your business you're allowing it to happen for. So so some of the lessons that were learned from the DAO, and obviously we'll watch the video in a second, but with that, smart contracts can have vulnerabilities, and you need to, obviously really make sure that you check them over first. There needs to be, if you're going to set up a governance structure like a DAO, you can't just create a blockchain, throw a token out there and say, okay, it's a DAO token. The DAO has to actually have a reason, like a centralized-ish structure. Like, so even if you're a decentralized DAO, you still need a CEO and you need people in charge so that if something goes wrong, there's a decision hierarchy that happens. Obviously, you need to think about regulatory frameworks. What happens if, and in certain circumstances, and security audits. That was one of the big things that everybody realized, was that lots of audits were needed, because it's not just about what you can do, it's about what others can do once you've done it to hack it or take it apart. So yeah. And so we'll watch the video on that now.
Hey everyone, today we'll be discussing the DAO hack, how it was dealt with, and what repercussions are still felt on the blockchain today. So some of you may already know, the DAO was a decentralized autonomous organization which ran on the Ethereum blockchain. It was the largest crowdfunding campaign in history, having raised $150 million from 11,000 contributors. It was set up as an investment fund, solely run by the investors. Volunteers would whitelist proposals brought to the table, and then investors would vote if they were interested in them, thus eliminating unnecessary costs and the principal agent problem. This seems like a perfect system, right? Well, there were some murmurings of issues from the start with regards to the code. Additionally, there are issues where investors don't actively participate in the decision-making process. They just piggyback on the legwork of others. This can cause issues with how quickly important decisions are made. On June 17, 2016, the DAO was hacked due to an error in the smart contracts and had 3.6 million Ether drained from it, about $60 million at the time. This had nothing to do with the Ethereum blockchain, but there was a huge effect on the price of Ether as the DAO held 15% of the currency. The hack sent the value of Ether down by 45% over the next 2 days. The DAO operates on a public blockchain, so everyone could see the code, therefore there was no backhanded nature at play. Surely the investors knew what they were buying into. The only fault was an individual being smarter than the collective. Vitalik Buterin, founder of the Ethereum Foundation, intervened and chose to rescue the funds by a hard fork. Obviously he did this as so much Ether was in the project and it really affected the value of his cryptocurrency. But would he intervene in every smart contract that goes wrong? Does it not set a dangerous precedent? We must remember that Ethereum was founded under the principles of decentralization and self-enforcement. It was sold as code is law. Yes, the hard fork has to be agreed by the majority of miners, but having a figurehead intervening and ruling over the chain goes against the point of cryptocurrency in the blockchain. It threatens the integrity of the system. The idea of cryptocurrency was really pushed post-2008 to stop these big players ruling over the financial world, and then the taxpayer having to bail out institutions that were too big to fail. Are Ethereum not acting as a central bank bailing out an investment fund that is just too big to fail? On the other hand, we have to discuss, is this actually just the lesser of two evils? Only the attacker will get harmed. We can learn from these mistakes to enforce how the future of blockchain governance should work. The blockchain is in its trial period, therefore making changes is not too damaging practice, but there is a discussion about the principles. If we are to say that code is law, what stops creators leaving bugs within the code that they can later on exploit? Does it lead to a similar situation we have now, where a minority can prosper as they swindle from the majority? Or will it teach investors due diligence? We can see that this discussion is still relevant today, as the Ethereum Foundation are being more careful with rolling out updates. The transition to proof of stake in Casper is regularly being delayed to test on the testnet. This ensures that a half-baked update open to exploitation is not deployed. Care has to be taken now as we know how much is at stake and how split the community is with these contentious forks. We currently see Vitalik endorsing a bailout with parity, where 500,000 Ether is trapped. The principle again is decentralization and self-enforcement. And a vote took place to gauge support for this hard fork, but only 39.4% were for it. If the fork does go through, we could see a split in the chain, which nobody really wants. What is required at the moment is proper governance and auditing of the smart contracts. That is not necessarily going to be easy going forward. Thank you.
Okay, and so in conclusion, tokenomics are really a critical part of crypto and blockchain. A token is not always present in a project, but it often is, and often it's a good way of seeing what a project's, I guess, interests are. Like, does its token have value? Is it well thought out? Is it integrated into the project? If it is, then that may speak well for the rest of the project. But if it's just a token to exist, then the question is why? How is this enhancing your security? Is it hurting it? In this kind of wonderful world of crypto, blockchain, and tokenomics, understanding where application of things for the purpose they're used for is happening, and where it's happening just to raise money or because it's fashionable to have a token. What does your token do? It should be well thought out, because otherwise, why would you have it? Just use Ethereum. And so really thinking about that, thinking cybersecurity, thinking about if you're a project, if you're going to work in crypto, I think by the end of this, we've come to the conclusion that you should be using a pre-existing network, linking into that, and not thinking about starting your own chain or doing your own smart contracts necessarily, but looking at the infrastructure that already exists, what it's used for and how it's used, and then kind of working backwards from that, from what the business needs, rather than just getting into blockchain, so to speak. And so kind of to end out on that, still on the Ethereum DAO discussion, kind of a video that talks, kind of down to the theory of when the DAO hack happened, how did it affect the community? What were the discussions that were happening? And I think that's kind of where we all are as a class now, ready to kind of have those just kind of discussions of what is prudent from a business perspective, and then what is the vision, and how do we meet somewhere in the middle to, not create all this pollution in the world, or not allow things to be hacked, or we know the problems now, and then how do we kind of come to those solutions, or for us to do. So I'll let this video finish and take it away.
Ethereum was built to be a sort of new and improved version of Bitcoin, and to do things that Bitcoin couldn't do. The original aim with Ethereum was to create not just a decentralized money, but essentially a decentralized global computer that could do computational problems. Ethereum has its own currency, Ether. The Ether, though, are really there to serve as sort of gas for the computations that are going on this network of computers that are running Ethereum.
The original reason why I likes the name is that ether is this sort of thing that, scientists were hypothesizing about in the 19th century, where people were thinking sound waves travel through air, water waves travel through water, so what do light waves travel through? And they hypothesized this existence of a medium that kind of permeates the entire universe, that's in that itself is kind of invisible, but it provides this kind of global reference frame, and it is, in some sense, sort of base layer that the universe runs on. And I actually felt that was a kind of fitting analogy for what I wanted to do. одеть биткоин, какой-то неправильный подход в это говорить. Я бы сказал, что Ethereum есть фичи и возможности делать такие вещи, которые у биткоина нет. То есть это так же, как сказать, что там может ли там телефон победить апельсин.
So Ethereum is a decentralized application platform. Its parent, Bitcoin, is more of a platform for transmission and storage of value. So Bitcoin was essentially an experiment in monetary theory gone wildly successful. You can think of Ethereum as a decentralized World Wide Web. It will eventually be able to run all the different kinds of applications that we see on the World Wide Web.
At the end of the day, it's this kind of fabric for what you could almost describe as being a kind of new internet infrastructure.
Eventually run a Facebook-like application. The difference is that it would be peer-to-peer, decentralized rather than a client-server type architecture. Ownership of data, ownership of communications or informational emissions will rest with the users of the system rather than the owners of a company like Facebook.
I think Vitalik knows that he's building a giant, globally distributed, reprogrammable supercomputer on a scale that mankind has never seen before. And he's doing it through a mechanism which initially supports this concept of smart contracts and issues a token just like Bitcoin, so there's value being created by the mining that we're doing. But the biggest difference is that Ethereum produces mines that are reprogrammable to tasks that we don't necessarily know what they're gonna do yet.
One of the highest ambitions of Ethereum from the beginning was that you would actually be able to program the functioning of entire corporations into this global computer. And you would have not just a decentralized currency, but a decentralized company that would run according to the rules that you had programmed into this network. So there was always this idea that Ethereum might allow what people call decentralized autonomous organizations.
So decentralized autonomous organizations, there's this idea that you can have these kind of automatons that are written in code that's set on the blockchain and that are governed through, smart contracts. It could be like some voting mechanism. It could even be some kind of voting by prediction markets or, some other new thing.
Would be a sort of company that would be run not according to human decision-making or human rules, but instead according to rules that you programmed into the Ethereum network.
Can actually leave this sort of decision-making up to an artificial intelligence. So if you had a board, you could basically say, hey, we can't come to a consensus, let's just refer this to an AI. And everyone just delegates their vote to the robot, and then the robot just makes the decision for them. And then eventually you could imagine that many boards are just run by AI and occasionally intervened by humans.
DAO attracted something like $150 million in the course of a little over a month. Basically, on the first days that it was operational, you had this attacker who came in and managed to take advantage of the contracts in a way that basically siphoned about half of the money into an account under the control of the attacker. The one saving grace in this attack was that the money that was siphoned off, because of the way the DAO was written, couldn't be used for 30 days. And so it began this countdown to try to figure out how to stop the attacker from getting control of the $60 million.
And so we have this time in order to determine whether we're going to do something about it or whether we're just going to let it go.
I don't think that Ethereum has the balls to leave the theft as is.
They're talking about hard forking the entire blockchain.
It set off this really pretty philosophical debate about how to deal with a problem like this in the realm of smart contracts and virtual currencies. And one of the great attractions of of the blockchain technology and of Bitcoin and Ethereum was that this record of transactions going back in time could never be changed. That's one of the reasons this was so valuable. You could look back and know that a transaction happened and know that nobody could tamper with that, nobody could change it. Once you had the DAO, people wanted to go back and change these contracts so that this person who seized all of this money, that those transactions wouldn't be valid. But that struck at the very core of what Ethereum was supposed to be.